Hey guys, long time no see. I have been hella freaking busy, so I missed pretty much 3 videos. However, I now officially have a bachelor's in art, which is, wow, that's wild to think about. Some thoughts good and some thoughts bad. Actually, if you want to hear my take on that experience in general, just say so and I'd be totally down to make a video. But anyway, let's move on to the thing we're actually talking about today. As an autistic person with a special interest in psychology, I spend a lot of time thinking about the mechanics of interpersonal relationships. People kind of have this instinct to create archetypes instead of considering the full spectrum of someone's social brain. And unfortunately, I kind of fall into the camp of being the quote, bad archetype. Grab some tea, grab a snack, or just pump out whatever art project you got going on while I yap in the background. Let's get into it. But first, I'm super excited to say that I have finally, at long friggin' last, taken the plunge and opened my Etsy sticker shop. This is a big step for me as a smaller artist, and I also really love getting to combine art and activism since things have gotten so scary lately. I'm flashing the stickers up right now on screen, and if you want one, my channel description has the link. The way people talk about empathy, particularly as it relates to interpersonal relationships, is well, it's cringy. It feels cringy. I'm sorry. I don't really know how else to put it. There is certainly a subset of people talking about it in a more practical way, trying to share well-rounded information that doesn't play off of borderline pseudoscience. But a much larger demographic seems to genuinely think empathy is the magic potion to being a good person. I wish there were more people out there demystifying having lower levels of empathy rather than stigmatizing it, either by parenting the popular opinion around them or trying to cope with personal experiences by creating a simple explanation. So let's try to be that change. I'm not a psychologist. I have no credentials. I don't want anyone here for even a minute operating off of the assumption that I do. I do, however, have low empathy. What does that mean? Well, it does not mean that I have low care for others. What happens to people matters to me. It just kind of matters in my reasoning brain more than in my feelings. That probably made no damn sense. My brain is fried. Just try to stay with me. Anyway, let's bring an example. A friend of mine has lost their grandpa and is crying. I love my friend, I care that they're sad, and I wish their grandpa had not passed away, but I'm not also sad. I only met their grandpa once or twice, so I don't have a personal connection to the tragedy at hand, and it's a lot harder to set off that social trigger we tend to have, presumably because of evolution, to be honest, that makes emotions transferable. This kind of thing often creates an awkward situation and is part of the reason I only have 1 or 2 friends. Most people can sense when you feel something different than they do, even if that other feeling is just indifference, and will be offended when the sight of their suffering doesn't also trigger suffering in you. People consider that sharing of wavelengths as the act of caring, rather than the actual things you do or say to help the situation, which I never understood. In fact, sometimes they may even bristle at you trying to comfort them, as it could come across as mechanical. And honestly, yeah, I definitely can see that, but I also don't really have any idea how to not come across like that without busting out my heavy-duty acting skills. But especially in moments of crisis, that kind of inauthenticity just feels wrong somehow. I say all this to explain what empathy actually is in practice. It's a tool to being there for and having kindness and emotional awareness of others, not the end-all be-all. And I'm not saying those things aren't easier with that tool. I'm just saying that from personal experience, it's like the difference between operating on autopilot versus manual. Yet the overwhelming viewpoint rails against this, using all of those terms I just mentioned and more interchangeably, demonizing anyone with the misfortune of having to navigate the social world without what is, let's be honest, an incredibly useful instinct, because apparently empathy is the root of all human good. Then of course also weaponizing their own empathy to sniff low empathetics out. Let's talk about empaths. Empaths have always irritated the hell out of me. I'm just gonna be blunt. And no, it's not because a suspicious amount of the most prolific self-proclaimed empaths have turned out to be horrible people, though that is slightly telling. It's the concept itself I have a problem with. Specifically the persona that's usually built around it. For those who don't know, an empath is someone who has high empathy and usually believes that this gives them absurdly good instincts on whether or not someone is bad news. You hear a lot of terms like energy or power, very nebulous things that can't really be explained using like the logical part of the brain, if that makes sense. They can only be felt. I see so many people that latch on hard to the label of empath and talk about it in the same way someone would talk about witchcraft, like reading an aura or sustaining psychic damage from someone's bad vibes before they even do anything blameworthy. I don't think this is a healthy community mindset. People are more complicated than that. You aren't a psychology wizard, and you certainly aren't immune to internal biases that may affect your energy sensors, I guess. I'm just gonna say it, there's something inherently ableist about the concept of vibes. There just is. Because if you're consistently perceiving that there's something off about a person without being able to pinpoint any actual incidents or like reasons, then chances are that's because there is, but there's some innocuous quirks that you're finding annoying or unsettling rather than nefarious intention on their part. This is not always the case, I know. Sometimes reading body language is just common sense street smarts. If you feel physically unsafe in a situation, or mentally, I don't know why I wrote just physically, but if you feel unsafe in a situation, you've got every right to nope your way out of it. That doesn't make you a bad person. But some of these viral little signs to watch out for type things are just ridiculous. Take dead eyes, for example. Like, guys, really? Are we seriously believing that the content of someone's character can be determined by the literal sparkle in their eye? Again, for those who don't know, having dead eyes is apparently when your eyes have a dull, emotionless appearance, which I'm struggling so hard with as a concept, let alone trying to define it. Like, what the hell kind of emotion is supposed to be showing up in your irises and pupils? They are literally just wet orbs in your face. Anyway, this to many is supposed to be a sign that someone is, for real, a psychopath. A leap in logic that never fails to astound me. I mean, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's like a little more reasonable, but it's just so much either way. Another example I've seen, though not as nonsensical, is dominating the conversation. This can mean frequently interrupting or going on and on about themselves or a topic they're interested in. While this is generally just rude, a lot of people do these things because of difficulty with social cues, having a harder time reading when it's their turn or when they've been talking for too long. It's quite a leap to assume someone has to be obsessed with themselves to do this. People in TikTok comments will be inclined to defend themselves by saying, "Oh, I look like this because of trauma," or "this is linked to a symptom of my autism," often in an apologetic way. And the ones sharing this information are usually understanding, saying that they get it, or putting disclaimers somewhere that they, quote, aren't talking about neurodivergent people. But you are. You are spreading negative information about neurodivergent people, whether you intend to or not, because you're publicly labeling the ways we look or act as bad news. And this encourages people to treat us in a certain way. And also, narcissists, sociopaths, etc. are neurodivergent people. So that particular wording is just straight up not what you're trying to say anyway. There's a pretty well-known Tumblr post that explains very well why it's not enough to just make exceptions for certain groups of people while still being hostile about those same traits in others. The hard truth about autism acceptance that a lot of people don't want to hear is that autism acceptance also inherently requires acceptance of people who are just weird. And yes, I mean those TM people. Middle schoolers who growl and bark and Naruto run in the halls, 30-somethings who live with their parents, furries, 14-year-olds who identify as star gender and use neo-pronouns, picky eaters, adults in fandoms, people who talk weird, people who dress weird. Ruthlessly deriding people for this stuff, then tacking an, "oh, but it's okay if they're autistic," does absolutely nothing to help autistic people. Like it or not, if you want to be an ally to autistic people, you're going to have to take the L and leave eccentric, weird people alone. You shouldn't be looking for acceptable reasons to be mean to people in the first place. Targeting non-disabled people with ableist rhetoric doesn't make it no longer ableist. It still encourages a culture of stigmatizing atypical brains. All it tells me is that you do think I'm annoying, cringy, suspicious, etc. You just feel guilty about it because you perceive me as disadvantaged in some way. Again, for autism in particular, I actually see similar thoughtlessness within the community itself. It's common to hear people get offended at the assertion that autistic people lack empathy, and that we're actually more likely to be hyper-empathetic instead. While this isn't not correct, it does carelessly look down on low empathy individuals. The truth is that empathy in autism is a complicated animal that can't really be pinned into those binaries. Alexithymia, difficulty connecting with others, lack of social understanding, etc. are all things that can cause someone to struggle with empathy. If y'all want to see a really good video essay on what low empathy in an autistic person could potentially look like by a low empathy person, y'all should check out Skulltrot's video on Donnie from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Okay, let's move on to the hard stuff. With as much sensitivity as I can muster, we need to talk about the concept of narcissistic abuse, or narc abuse as it's sometimes shortened to. This is exactly how it sounds when someone abuses another, usually their child or partner, supposedly as a result of their NPD symptoms. I'm not the only one who's brought up taking issue with this in our cultural consciousness, but we're definitely in the minority. To get this out of the way, I'm not opposed whatsoever to people opening up about their experiences of emotional abuse. What I do have a problem with is armchair diagnosing and demonizing. I don't think anyone I've heard talk about being a victim of narcissistic abuse actually knows for sure whether or not the person in question has NPD. They're just assuming based on what they've read online or have been told anecdotally by others. It's not just this idea that all narcissists are abusers, which, believe it or not, doesn't have to be true, and I'll explain why in a minute. But that in order to treat another person so badly, you must be a narcissist. At least that's the vibe that I'm getting. The definition of NPD has pretty much been dumbed down to asshole disease for a long time. It's as if narcissists aren't sick like everyone else with a mental disorder, but innately evil people who lurk in the shadows just waiting for the opportunity to strike. Actually, you know what? All cluster Bs get that treatment, but we're not going to unpack all of them. I mean, not really a histrionic personality disorder, but that's just because no one really knows what that one is. I'm going to be completely honest. Anyway, this mindset is justified by two things. The first is that in order to be diagnosed with NPD, you're required to have a pattern of harming others. Except that's not actually true. The diagnostic criteria for NPD involves meeting 5 out of 9 symptoms listed in the DSM-5, and only one of the options directly having to do with harming others is interpersonally exploitative behavior. The other symptoms can make healthy relationships very challenging, but not a pipe dream if properly managed or redirected. But that brings us into the second justification, which is that no true narcissist would seek psychological help. And if they do end up in a therapy office by some miracle, they'll be too consumed by the delusion that they're the true victim to get anywhere. From what I've read, it seems to be true that most narcissists only seek help when they've been given some sort of ultimatum, and this is coming from narcissists themselves, or are otherwise in danger of losing their relationships. However, some people seem to think that NPD only causes distress to others, not the disordered person themselves. So the only reason someone with NPD would want treatment would be for selfless reasons. And as we know, that's obviously impossible. But the truth is that narcissistic grandiosity is not a genuine sense of confidence, it's a defense system that's built up after an abusive or dysfunctional upbringing. You'll also see excessive praise as a potential factor for developing NPD, but the context often left out is that this praise has implications of the child's worth being contingent on how perfect they're able to be perceived as. Anyway, the internal reality of narcissism is that they need constant external validation because they can't create it for themselves, which is exhausting and frustrating. They don't have a sense of identity outside of others, and that's no way to live. All of these simplified perceptions allow people to talk about all NPD sufferers using blatantly dehumanizing language we would normally call out or at least raise an eyebrow at. It's very hard to spot a narcissist if you're not aware of who you are before you get into any relationship. If you're a sweet, agreeable person, a people pleaser, low self-esteem, passive, you're the perfect prey. All narcissists are energy vampires, but for 95% of them, it's an unconscious process. Those who become aware of it, embrace it, become dangerous and an addiction to the soul. When the narcissist sees a beautiful empath soul, they at first idolize the empath, but jealousy quickly sets in. That is when the attacks begin. The narcissist seeks to ruin the empath any way possible, whether it's to make them feel like shit on a daily basis or to make them feel paranoid as they are paranoid. The empath cannot believe that the narcissist is such a lowlife because the empath is such a wonderful person. The narcissist doesn't want the empath to know that. He wants the empath to think he is a piece of shit loser like the narcissist. Guys, come on, this is an interpersonal relationship, not the plot of Snow White. They 100% have incentive to get help, would benefit from help, but the problem is that being confronted with the reality that they're imperfect or undesirable causes unbearable distress. They don't need any more mental barriers to deny themselves treatment. Yet you've got tons of neurotypical people insisting that if you even think you might be a narcissist, you couldn't possibly have NPD. This is problematic not just for narcissists who want to get themselves back on track, but for non-narcissists who are given an easy out for their toxic behavior. It's not just NPD, but borderline personality disorder too, sometimes ASPD, depending on what's being described. But either way, it's the mindset that you must have some innate sinister nature to consistently do wrong by others, and that's not true. Too many people engage in rhetoric that is blatantly anti-recovery, then place the blame for it entirely on the narcissist. And this also leads too many people to a place of unaccountability. We are all capable of manipulation, cruelty, and toxic desperation, regardless of how our brains operate. High empathy does not protect anyone from the dark sides of human nature. If you take anything from this section, please let it be that you are not immune to being a bad person. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, why are you even putting energy into defending narcissists? Who cares? More of them hurt people than don't. I get where you're coming from, and victims of abuse should always take precedence when discussing individual cases. I truly think that in their case, in many ways this is a coping strategy. It's easier to believe that an abuser, or any potential abuser out there, is subhuman in some way. But the way we generalize groups of people also always needs to be examined. And I don't see much mindfulness out there in doing that when it comes to this. These things are all connected. To bring things back to general territory, low empathy is thought to be the root of disregard for others, selfishness, and of course, narcissism, and a whole host of other unsavory things. And you know what? Screw it. It's not fair. It just isn't. Low empathy can be taken advantage of. High empathy can be weaponized. If you're dealing with having low empathy, I just want you to know that you're not fighting your sinister instincts so you can be a good person or anything. You're just someone who needs to pay closer attention than most people have to. That can be really exhausting. What the fuck was that? I just shot off a fucking firework outside my window. What the shit? Alright, anyway. You're just someone who needs to pay closer attention than most people have to. That can be really exhausting. I understand. If anyone who is kind enough to watch till the end, thank you very much by the way, also doesn't have a lot of empathy, comment your experiences with it and how it affects you. And if you have high empathy, also do that. Hearing people with high empathy talk about it in good faith is really interesting to me because it's so different from my own experience. Thanks for watching. You can support my art by checking out my other socials in the channel description, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!